Good afternoon. My name is Ann Kinseth. I'm the Director of Education at the Meadows Museum, and thank you for joining us today for Thinking Through Velázquez, Las Meninas and its Afterlife. It's my pleasure to introduce our speakers today. Rebecca Teresi is an art historian specializing in early modern Spanish art. She is in the final stages of her PhD at the Johns Hopkins University. Her dissertation, which addresses the Immaculate Conception in Spanish art, also grapples with Velázquez and his unique approach to representation. Santiago García has been making comics for over 10 years in collaboration with various artists. He created Las Meninas, which was translated in English to Ladies in Waiting, with Javier Olivares. Las Meninas won the prize for Best Spanish Work of the Year at the Salón de Cómic de Barcelona in 2015 and the Premio Nacional del Cómic in 2015. Please join me in welcoming Rebecca Teresi and Santiago García.
Thank you so much, Anne, for having us, and thank all of you for joining. Today, I'm going to just cut straight to the chase because we want to have plenty of time for questions at the end. So today we are going to be looking at Las Meninas together, and insofar as it is possible to do so briefly, we will begin to unravel its meaning. Then we'll turn towards the Ladies in Waiting, which I have my copy here. You may want to get your copy, which is Santiago García and Javier Olivares' marvelous book that seeks to tell the story of Las Meninas, but it also uses the biography of Velázquez and the components of the painting to raise a lot of interesting questions about the creative process, about the aspirations of the artist, the nature of representation, and the afterlife of a masterpiece. Santiago asks us, would it be possible for everyone to just check that they've got mute on, because I'm hearing a little background noise and it might be bouncing back on your computers too. Let's see. We are so lucky today, thank you, to be joined by the author, and I hope not to take up too much time framing the work so that we can really pick his brain. So without further ado, let's do some looking together. The jewel of the Museo del Prado, which is Spain's foremost museum and one of the richest collections in the world, is without a doubt Las Meninas. Ask almost any art historian or artist, what is the greatest painting in the history of Western art? And the answer will almost certainly be Las Meninas. It has been analyzed, copied, and revered by artists, scholars, and thinkers since the paint dried in 1656. But why? The thing that springs to mind when looking at Las Meninas for the first time is probably its remarkable naturalism. It has almost a photographic quality to it, and in fact, the picture's earliest description praises it in exactly these terms. And we see that here together. There is no praise that can match the taste and skill of this work, for it is reality and not painting. As Palomino points out, the painting is executed with astonishing skill and realism. No one could wield a brush like Velázquez before, or maybe even since, but I think that the author of this quote misses the point altogether. Las Meninas is painting, not reality. This is something that Velázquez was very much aware of and is in fact what Las Meninas is all about. The painting asks, what does it mean to paint? To portray, to take a few yards of stretched and sized canvas, add crushed pigments suspended in oils to its surface, and create an imitation of reality. Artists like Goya, Picasso, Dali, Manet, William Merritt Chase, John Singer Sargent have all grappled with Las Meninas. In the 1950s, Picasso even became so obsessed with Las Meninas that he painted a variation on it 58 times. And the exhibition on this series in Barcelona in 2008 was appropriately titled Forgetting Velázquez, which evidently Picasso could not do. This continues today with contemporary artists and beyond the Western world. The latest response to Velázquez is in a completely different medium, but perhaps more deeply engaged with the story than any work that has come before it. And I'm speaking, of course, about the comic written by Santiago with his friend and collaborator, Javier Olivares. So Santiago, can you tell us a little bit about the book, why you and Javier joined generations of ambitious artists and chose to take it on in the comic format, and why Las Meninas?
Hi, Rebecca. Hi, everybody. Happy to be here with you. Thank you for coming to this lecture. Well, Javier and I, we are both from Spain. And if you grow up in Spain, you grow under a very long shadow cast by a couple of works of art and literature. In Spain, as I imagine it happens in the US, we have like this kind of big national masterpieces, which are like the compass for our culture. Ours are from what we call the golden century, and they are the things that everybody is, I can say, forced to study in high school, and one of them is, of course, Quixote, the novel by Cervantes, and the other one is Las Meninas. So in Spain, you usually grow up knowing Las Meninas like this absolute pinnacle of Spanish culture. What happens is that makes it very, I mean, it doesn't make it more interesting for for young people who is trying to discover exciting new things. It's like the definition of the establishment. Yes. So I wasn't really interested in Las Meninas. I looked at the painting when I was growing up, and it was like, this is a very boring painting. It's just people standing up. There's no action. The characters are uninteresting. They are just a bunch of novel people just standing up in some room. And the most exciting thing that is happening here is that someone is maybe painting something. I didn't understand. I mean, I just take it for granted that it was one of those things that they try to make you to swallow, like a high art or something like that. Everything changed when I went to college to study art history. And the more I knew about art, the more I knew about art history and art theory, the more I understood what this was really made a masterpiece of Las Meninas. Then one day, Javier and I were thinking of doing a book, and I wanted to do that about what's the meaning of a masterpiece? What is a masterpiece? Why do we call a work a masterpiece? Is it something that is inherent to the work? Is something that is inside the book or the painting or any other work? Or are masterpieces because we are saying that they are since they started or since a long time ago? I mean, so we wanted to explore this idea. And if you want to explore this idea from the side of the art in Spain, you can as well go for the best example, which is Las Meninas, because we have other masterpieces, but I think that this is the more commonly agreed, like the number one, which every artist after Velázquez has been trying to meet a challenge. I mean, it's like Las Meninas challenge every artist after them, and it's still there. This page is about how Las Meninas was used during the Franco era with for a nationalistic purpose. It was like they were trying to have a revival of the imperial greatness of the past, and obviously that meant that we could argue that Las Meninas was the greatest painting of all time, which is sad because you're arguing for something that is 300 years old, but that's what they had at that time. So it was I think the 300th anniversary, and yeah.
In 56, yes. And I love this little stamp here, right? That's Franco, and the stamp is that?
Yeah, that's Franco. Yeah, the stamp of Franco, and he was also in the coins.
And even today, if you go to Madrid. Can you talk a
Yeah.
little bit about this?
Yeah, I think this is, I haven't been to Madrid since more than one and a half years, so I haven't seen this in person, but I think this is from last December or something like that. And they are still using Las Meninas like this kind of identity, icon for Spain and Madrid. And as you can see, the right upper right hand, you see that flag like coming out of the head of the Menina. So it's a nice symbol of how nationalism and high art conflate to do this kind of propaganda.
And I think I think it's kind of funny because this silhouette of the Menina becomes so iconic, but actually that type of clothing was subject to sumptuary regulations in the precise years that Las Meninas was painted. So we're looking at almost an illicit object.
Yeah. Well, it keeps changing over the time.
And I want to, before we get back to the painting, I just want to bring, this is one of my favorite spreads from the comic, and it comes at the end. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you conceptualized this, because we just talked about Picasso and Sargent and William Merritt Chase.
Las Meninas is kind of a story, biography. I don't dare to say biography, but I mean a story of the life of Velázquez and how he painted Las Meninas. But it's, as I said, also kind of a exploration of how a masterpiece is made. And our idea is that it's not Velázquez by himself who makes a masterpiece. He only paints a masterpiece. But who makes that painting a masterpiece? Well, maybe Picasso and Foucault and Dali and a lot of people. I mean, we all are making a masterpiece of Las Meninas since we are still talking about that year after year. And I mean, and that goes all the way, not only from the artist, but also to us, to every one of us. I mean, Javier and myself are in the drawing, but everybody actually is there. I mean, you are there, and everyone who is watching this lecture is in there. I mean, as long as we're still talking about Las Meninas, like this masterpiece, we're making it a masterpiece.
That's a perfect place to return to the painting. And then we'll get back to more discussion about how you wrote the book and the collaborative process. So it would seem that artists and creatives for hundreds of years have been obsessed with Las Meninas, framing their own work in competition with that of the master, including Santiago and Javier's contribution. So returning to the picture that launched 1,000 pictures and millions of words, then what exactly do we see? On its surface, Las Meninas is a monumental court portrait. And by the way, the 24-year-old Velázquez may have won his gig as court portraitist using the very painting of the 18-year-old King Philip IV that's at the Meadows Museum, or one very much like it if it's not exactly this picture. But Las Meninas, made over 30 years later at the height of the artist's career, is his triumph. It is astonishing in its realism and the artist's uncanny ability to capture optical effects, to describe a variety of textures and tones, light effects with a few quick, confident strokes of the brush. When you look at the painting in person, if you stand just in front of it, you truly feel as though you become part of the scene. But what scene do we join when we look? Thanks to the earliest description we have of the painting by a Spanish artist called Antonio de Palomino, and he wrote the first great biography of Spanish artists. And incidentally, one of his works, you can see here, can be found in the Meadows. We know exactly where we are and who everyone in the picture is, and also more or less the narrative of what's going on in Las Meninas. When we arrive in front of the picture, we perceive a room of palatial dimensions, and we are in fact inside the old Alcázar Palace in Madrid that burned down on Christmas Eve in the 18th century. And there's a very interesting conspiracy theory about why it burned down. And if you want to know more about that, you ought to pick up your copy of the comic. And at the center of the picture is the Infanta Margarita, who is at the time the only heir to the Spanish Empire. You may also see that I have Infanta Margarita here with me today. She pauses to look up. She's 5 years old, and one of her attendants, one of the so-called meninas, is trying to offer her a small clay jug. And you notice how Velázquez here in this detail even suggests the movement of her hand in an almost photographic manner, like a camera that can't keep up with a moving form in a dim room. Meanwhile, the other menina stops what she is doing to gaze directly at the viewer, dipping into a curtsy. To the right, court dwarves, which were staples of the Spanish court, such as we see in the work by Carreño at the Meadows, behave similarly to the meninas. One is absorbed in his own rather mean trick of teasing the dog, while the other pauses mid-moment to engage with the viewer. So why have some of the figures stopped to look up while others do not? Because someone like us has just arrived off stage and in front of the pictorial space. The figures perceive something, they intuit a presence arriving to join them. The Queen's Palace Marshal, who we see in the distance opening the door, clues us in. If we are familiar with Habsburg court protocol, which I'm sure you all are, we know that it must be then the King and Queen arriving in this space, and that's Philip IV and Mariana of Austria, who is in fact his 22-year-old niece, but that is a story for another day. We know that Philip frequently visited Velázquez's studio, and Santiago and Javier were sure to include that as part of the narrative in the comic. And in fact, we see Philip and his queen, Mariana, reflected in the mirror beyond. And her image in this mirror reflection is strikingly similar to the oil sketch dating to around the same time at the Meadows. This is radical and must be emphasized. Las Meninas stands as the first painting made from the point of view of the subject rather than that of the artist. That is to say, the painting presents the point of view of the king standing in front of the picture, or now, though Velázquez certainly would not have imagined it possible, from the point of view of us. But the most important figure in the entire composition is just to the left, and that is, of course, the artist himself. Dressed in the rich black costume of a courtier, he stands behind his monumental canvas. Could it be the very one we're looking at? It dominates the composition, which is all the more curious since it is an element that we both see and yet do not see. He is poised to wield his just charged brush. He is a painter at work with the tools of his trade, including his palette, his maul stick, and a variety of brushes. But he is not only a painter, he is also a courtier, esteemed as part of the king's innermost circle. And this is something he is keen for us to acknowledge, as he takes care to include the keys of his office as the chamberlain of the king at his waist. Velázquez here quite literally holds the keys to the kingdom. If if Picasso and Goya and Dali and Chase and dozens of other, if not hundreds of other artists were in competition, even obsessed with Velázquez, then Velázquez felt the same way about Titian and Rubens, who were great artists that came in the generations before him. Rubens, in fact, even mentored Velázquez during a visit to Spain in his early days as a court painter. And in fact, Velázquez pointedly includes real paintings, even one by Rubens, which was held in the royal collection, in the background of the picture. And you can see that that detail that I just showed you is from the top of the wall behind the figures. And not so subtly, the theme of these pictures is from Ovid, and that's of the competition between mortals and gods, making a point about Velázquez's own place in art history. That is to say, a mortal so skilled at his craft, painting, that he defies even divine practitioners, such as Titian or Rubens. And I should also note that Velázquez's job at court was not only a painter, but also essentially a royal curator. So he was custodian of these pictures as well as in competition with them. In sum, the painting is a manifesto on the nature of art and the status of the artist. It is fully aware that it is an illusion, and yet it catches us up in the deception to the glorification of Velázquez as an artist. He is showing off, and he is cementing his own legacy in the history of art, all in this one painting. I think he would be absolutely delighted to know that we are all here today still talking about Velázquez in 2021. And I think the illusionistic trick we have here on Zoom, where we're all together, even though we are all over the world here, would be delightful to him too. But the most important element of the painting, and the last to be painted, is the dagger-shaped crimson cross on his chest, which is of course the cross of the Order of Santiago. The Order of Santiago was an old religious military order founded in the 12th century, and it was perhaps the highest honor a civilian could achieve in early modern Spain. Velázquez wanted desperately to be admitted to this noble order, and it was going to be the last and most important achievement for him, the final feather in his cap. This is something, by the way, that Rubens and Titian had both achieved, not the Order of Santiago, but nobility in general. And you may, if you've been to the Meadows recently, you may recall that we have our very own Knight of Santiago in the collection, as well as a Calatrava Knight, which is a different order, at the Kimball, also painted by Velázquez, I should add. But in order to be admitted to the Order of Santiago, Velázquez had to prove both that he had completely pure blood, which is to say only Christian ancestors. Recall that we are in early modern Spain, and that he lived the life of a nobleman, a key feature of which was never working, particularly never engaging in manual labor. So the question that's raised by the painting is, was a painter a thinker or a craftsman? And this is the problem at the painting's heart, but also at the heart of the comic. And it is why Velázquez insists on presenting himself in the company of the key members of the royal court. So he places himself on equal footing with the king, the queen, and the heir to the throne. And on this note about Santiago, I think it's the perfect time to return back to Santiago. So in the time that remains, I'd like to explore the graphic novel more fully and fluidly. And Santiago, the story of Velázquez's nobility trial, of whether or not they would admit him to the Order of Santiago, is the narrative thread that weaves through the whole story that you've put together here. And it provides many of the points for flashback and flash forward. And I was hoping that we could start there and you could answer how you decided to tell the story of such a dense work as Las Meninas, because it's so complicated and you really hit on every possible angle in this one book. And I mean, as we saw, thousands of pages have been written about Las Meninas. So how did you decide where to start?
That's a good question. I mean, as I said before about the painting, that it was a painting that has like no action. It was certainly a dynamic painting, and the same could be said about Velázquez's life. I mean, he was no Caravaggio. He wasn't somebody who had a very adventurous life, and he didn't do like any thrilling feats of bravery or anything like that. He was mostly,
just because people in the audience may not know, he's famed for like punching people and stabbing people and all kinds of
killing people. Or Jose Rivera, or any number of other, famous artists that were at the same time like these mythical figures that larger than life, that you could just take their lives and you will have a complete set of events that will be easy to spin into a biopic. So that's not the case. It's absolutely the opposite in the case of Velázquez, because he lived a very quiet life, the courtier life, and he was most similar to a civil servant and tries to get to the end of their term with their objective met than any kind of romantic figure. And more, even worse, is that we don't have any writing about his thinking. Not about his life, not about his ideas about art. So we don't know what were the inner workings of Velázquez. He's like this kind of mystery and boring figure in the center of this exciting.
I think that's unfair. Boring, Santiago.
So you have to try to make some kind of thrilling story out of this. What's the easiest way? The easiest way is the detective story. So we created a mystery, and the mystery was he fit to be included in the Order of Santiago, which, by the way, I think is a beautiful name. And who was going to be the detective? The detective was going to be the official of the order who was going to be investigating that. So it's a very, it's a very easy trick to just use this guy to investigate, and at the same time that he's investigating, he's like questioning a lot of people who knew Velázquez, and through them we're reliving the life of Velázquez. And that's like the skills. That's the way you can just start to put together a series of scenes that give us a sense of what he was doing. Or anyway, I want to say it's a fictional book.
Yes.
I have met a lot of people who told me they should study Velázquez with your book, and I say, well, if you study Velázquez with my book, and I have to make a test of Velázquez Las Meninas, and your answers are taken from my book, you're going to fail, because there are a lot of just fiction, invention. I like this sentence from The Man Who Sought Liberty Balance, which is when the fact becomes legend, print the legend. So in this case, we have a lot of legends, and we almost always chose the legend over the fact. And sometimes because that's in fact the point of the book. The book is not so much about what happened, but about how what we think that happened influences what we think now. It's more about
fun, Santiago, than being an art historian. If we could only pick the legend every time, I think it would.
I think, art history is the same as a story of art. History is stories. You're always writing some kind of like fiction in some way. But obviously we're freer to do that when you're doing that in a book like this.
But you did a lot of research, right? Did you start Palomino, or how did you start? And did you know that you were going to use the detective from day one, or did it take some time to come up with that?
I can't remember when the idea of the detective appeared, but I did a lot of research, and I could still be doing it today. It never ends. It's just like, I'm really
this is a picture of all your research, right?
Those are some of the notes of different books and essays and things that you read, and sometimes you can get lost in that. And I'm very sorry for people in that history that have to
read a lot,
like dissertations.
Yes. Now, so you went from the research stage, and then this is one of your earliest outlines, right?
Well, this is one of the most important moments when we were working the book, because what you see on the left hand is exactly the complete map of the book. It's just that rectangle with some squares inside, and then like these small circles. It's when I understood how it was going to be. Every square where will be scenes of Velázquez's life,
Yes.
and the rectangle will be like the investigation of the officer. So inside that, we will have the scenes of the Velázquez life, and then the circles outside will be like the cultural life of the work, like Foucault, Picasso, Bueno Vallejo, etc. And this is after a lot of work. Finally, Javier and I get together, and we work in doing every page of the book like in miniature, like in thumbnails.
So you sketched this out just for yourself, right?
Yeah, this is something that I did. I mean, I know it's so beautifully rendered that you can believe that it's all my work.
You are on
yeah.
par with Velázquez, Santiago.
Yeah. So, but what you can see here is that maybe the most important thing when you're doing comics is, before everything, is just what kind of information are you going to put in the page, and how are you going to distribute that? What's going to be the pacing? I mean, I can do pages and pages just with squares and rectangles, and you say this guy has gone crazy. Not. I know exactly what is going to be in every one of those squares, and that's the most important thing. So yeah, this is yeah.
This is all you send to the artist, to Javier.
No. Javier didn't say anything. What?
I just put up the script on the screen.
No, this is not the script. This is not the
script.
script. This is kind of what you call like a timeline in which I have different scenes and different things that are going to happen, but it's not a script yet. This is a script, yeah, but you have to open it to know what is in there. So yeah.
Okay, so you send Javier the script, and then he cannot see your sketch, right?
No, this on the left hand you have my sketch, my notebook, and then on the right hand you have thumbnails by Javier. So he didn't see what I did on my notebook, but as you can see, the idea is that these guys are looking at something, and they have and the idea is the eye that I do, and Javier, without seeing that, did kind of the same. So in that way,
script, he was able to get to almost the same thing you had envisioned in your mind.
Yeah. So that's the idea, that we're on the same page. And that's what we can say now. Yeah.
And then I'm going to take this next slide, shows one of the early stages of what he's penciling in, right?
This is the penciling. This is all done by pencil, which is the first phase, phase of the final art, and he draws everything by pencil, and then he does the ink and the color, which is computer generated. I mean the color, not the inks.
Yes. So he draws the pencil stage by hand.
And the inking as well.
And the inking as well. Wow.
But not the color. The color is by computer.
I see. Okay, that's very interesting. Is that the standard nowadays with books?
The standard tends to be more and more to do everything in the computer. I mean, people now draw with these graphic tablets, and they use these digital pencils, and they draw directly. Javier is old school. He's almost from the times of Velázquez, so he still does like physical paper work, but more and more people are just going to the screen directly.
And now I have another penciling, right? This is also pencil.
Yeah.
And then
that's pencils. Mm-hmm.
And then that's
and that's the finished art. Yeah.
Yes. And this is such a great spread, because this is part of the biography of Velázquez that you tell in the comic, is his trip through Italy. Both of his trips, I think you cover. And it's kind of funny how, I mean, I think maybe Italians would laugh at this because he goes from Venice, which seems quite orderly, and then to Rome, and people are getting a little bit rougher, and then you get to Naples and it all is a little crazy.
Yeah, it's I mean, the guy in the last panel is Jose Rivera, el Españoleto. And yeah, as we said before, he was one of those characters, and he helps us to introduce some kind of thriller inside the mostly quiet life of Velázquez, to use this.
You could let the fabulous stories there go, but we will leave it at that so that the audience is encouraged to check out the book for themselves. Can you tell me what we're looking at here?
Well, yeah, this is from the printer, and then what it's important to keep in mind is that comic books are not. It's art, mass art. I mean, it's mass produced, and it's not something that you do to hang up in a gallery and to see the original, the original work. Is something that you do to be printed all over and to have multiple copies. And in that way, it's very important. Javier went directly to the printer, and he was there when they were doing the pages and when they were printing everything, because colors, inking, the type of paper they use, all those things are finally what are defining how it's going to look, and it's going to look different from what Javier is seeing in his screen. So it's important that he's there. He did some adjustment when he saw the first pages coming out, and they look at them, and he said, we could go a little bit darker here or a little bit. I mean, in some way, it's the printing machine the one who is doing the real work.
Well, so then we get to the Velázquez debate of whether it's a craft or an art, right? This is the very much a craft part.
Yeah, that's the point. Yeah, actually, I don't think it's a craft or an art because it's mass produced or not. I mean, I think that could be a debate, maybe another time. But I mean, we're in 2021.
Now, speaking of art, you said when you were talking about it being intended to be mass produced, right? And the end goal of the comic is the individual reader, in front of the book, experiencing it by themselves. But it was on the wall, was it not?
Yeah.
Talk a little bit.
That's something nice that they do, and they tend to do more with comics lately than it used to be. And we like it because it's a way to show different sides of the work. People go to the gallery and they see it, and you have the opening, and you are with them. And I mean, doing comics is a solitary work. You're in your home, and you don't usually get that kind of immediate feedback that you have if you're a musician and on stage, or even if you do movies and you go to the theater and see how people react, because you can go to the people's homes and go over their shoulder and look at how they react to reading your book. So it's nice to have this kind of real life feedback. But obviously, what I try to say is that this is not why we do the comic. I mean, this is like a side effect of the comic, but I mean, it's not the reason for it.
Well, it's very gratifying. So I wanted to ask you as well, because in addition to being a comic book writer, you also translate, I don't know how many hundreds of comics over the years.
I wish it was 100.
Well, you've translated an awful lot of comics from English, usually into Spanish. And now so many of your comics have been translated. Las Meninas has been translated from Spanish into French and English now, and who knows, it will be translated into other languages. I wonder if you could talk how that process works a little bit, and can you talk a little bit about the change in the title? I think that's kind of interesting. Do you have any input as the author on that choice?
Not about the title, because that's something that the publisher decides, and they think they have to try for the more commercial title. It's something that is kind of important when you're trying to sell a book. And I guess they like the book, but they maybe didn't think Las Meninas was so famous over here. So
statues around.
Well, I remember when I saw them the book in Spanish, and the book is called Las Meninas in Spain, and they were, well, this is fine, this is beautiful and everything, and what does the title mean? And it was like, it's the painting. Which painting? It was like, so they maybe thought that if they didn't know what it was, their audience probably wouldn't know what it was, and if they just could see a strange looking word on the cover. So they thought that maybe translating that, I don't know. I mean,
they keep it
what?
Is it Les Menines in French, or what is it?
That's a good question. I think it's Las Meninas or Les Menines, or I mean, or whatever title. The painting is more known in France than in the US, I think.
So make sure that everybody would know. Okay, but and I noticed too, and the paper is different, because when you were talking about the importance of the way the paper looks at the art, even in the English edition, the paper is more of a matte paper than the shiny, glossy paper you have in the Spanish one.
Yeah, that's something that they decide as well. I don't know what are the factors that are in play there. I don't know if it's an economic or aesthetic decision. I can tell you that Javier like it. I mean, Javier saw that, and he said that he liked that paper and how it came out at the end.
Now, I'm going to ask one more question, and then I think that way we'll leave plenty of time for questions from the audience. I was going to ask you, one of the insets in the comic is from Vasari's lives. So anyone who's taken Renaissance art history would know about Vasari, who's the first art historian. And you made a point to include these really interesting tidbits. This is Raphael. But I think that since Las Meninas was published and won the National Comic Award in Spain in 2015, is that right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's been a lot of other kind of art historical comics published. I just got this one from the library, although I haven't read it, but it was published in 2019 about Artemisia. So if anyone wants to keep their art history comic journey going, is there something about art historical subjects that lend themselves well to comics? Do you see Las Meninas, your comic Las Meninas, as a trendsetter?
Well, first, I mean, this fragment of extracted from the lives of by Vasari. This was something that predated our book, because Javier and I were doing art history comics for a couple of years before starting Las Meninas. We did these short stories about all kind of artistic subjects, from Goya to more contemporary subjects, or art brut, or any kind of things. And one of the things we did was a whole series of lives by Vasari short stories. And we thought that this one about Raphael, which was published a couple of years before, could fit nicely inside the book. So that's why we use it. So the book that you saw about Artemisia, I think it's Italian. And I can say that in Spain, after Las Meninas, we've seen a few books, a few comic books, or graphic novels, approaching the subject of artists and art and high art, quite a few of them. And I think there are more, even in general, in the international scene. I think that mostly what's happening is that more and more people who are doing comic books or graphic novels are people who come from art studies, are people who went to college for arts or art history, and they're more familiar with these models, and they even see themselves reflected in the struggles and ideas of the art history, and they maybe try to project them in their own works or something like that. I think that's probably what's happening, but it's true that there weren't that many before we did this. And I'm not saying that we are trendsetter. I mean,
we would never admit to that.
Yeah, I think it was just the right place at the right moment. The time has come for this.
Yes, it's a much easier to write a graphic novel about an art historical subject because you've got images there than it would be to write a fiction novel with no illustration to look at. Okay, so
maybe.
Should I turn it over to Anne again now? And maybe you can take the questions.
Absolutely. Thank you both so much. Questions started flying in very early on. Some of them I think are going to be best suited for Santiago, some for Rebecca, and some I will let you guys decide. Early in the talk, Santiago, you mentioned how Las Meninas and Don Quixote were huge cultural icons in your education in Spain. Howard is curious about Picasso's Guernica. Was that also in the mix?
Well, I mean, given my age, when I was a kid in school, I was actually, I got the tail end of the Franco dictatorship. So that's not something that was very prominent in the curriculum, because obviously Picasso was a symbol of the Republic, so it wasn't like, and the Guernica in particular was a propagandistic work against the Franco side in the war. So that wasn't something like that. But then when the democracy started after 75 and the Guernica came to Madrid, I was going to say came back, but I don't think he was there before. So it came to Madrid. It was a big deal. I don't know if it was included now in the, in high school and things like that. But obviously, the presence of Picasso in Spanish culture in this way has been more recent than Velázquez, who has been there over the decades and for a long time. But I will say that right now in Madrid, everybody will tell you that the two things that you have to see is Las Meninas and Guernica. They're so close that it's just a short walk away, one of the other.
It makes it convenient, yes.
Yeah, it's very...
Yeah. This is a question that I think either of you can take a stab at. So it comes from Joe, and he is wondering about Velázquez's Las Meninas, and if there's any art historians who don't buy into the more what he calls enigmatic qualities of the work and really just take it face value that this is a simple family portrait.
I don't think so. What do you think, Santiago? I mean, I think there's some that push the theoretical angle a lot harder than others, but I think no one would claim it's just a portrait of a family.
I think that both things can be true. I mean, it can be a family portrait and it can be at the same time a mystery and something else. I think that's especially the saving grace of the painting, that you never know if you're being played or not. You never know if there's. It's like what happened with conspiracies, especially now, that you never know if there's some kind of hidden sign in there, and that apparently normal surface that points to a completely different meaning. And I think that's what drives crazy people and what makes them come back and back to the painting. Very clever by Velázquez. Yeah.
Well, and the first earliest title we have in the inventory, and I think you covered that in the graphic novel, is The Family of Philip IV, right?
That's right. But we never know if that's the title that Velázquez has in mind.
He probably didn't give it a title, but the earliest recorded title is just simply Family of Philip IV.
Yeah. The Las Meninas is kind of, we were talking before about how the publisher looks for the more commercial title for the book. Well, Las Meninas was the most commercial title that the director of the Museo del Prado looked for the painting when they were opening up in the 19th century to a more international audience. They thought that would be like kind of more touchy than the Family of Philip IV.
Yeah, I think you covered that on the last page.
Yeah.
You can find it. There we go. At the end.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, the title is not impressive to the Madrazos.
Well, thank you. So this question comes from Linda, who says that she believes French painter Manet called Las Meninas kind of the theology of painting. And she's wondering how you guys would interpret that idea.
That is something that was said about Las Meninas, but comes from a century before Manet. Manet called him the painter of painters. But the theology of painting comment is from Giordano, I believe. And I think that, it's a painting that asks what it means to paint. And I think that that's why it's appealed to artists, why they're so obsessed. I mentioned that at the very beginning. The idea of painting as an illusion is something that sort of haunts painters in the 17th century, especially in Spain. Because if you think about it, we get more towards this in later centuries, but the idea of the fact that we're not seeing Velázquez or the Family of Philip IV in the painting at all. It's just paint smeared on a canvas, but it's so real. And I think that's where the theology of painting question gets in. I think that's why it was. And then the painter of painters, which is what Manet deemed Velázquez, and he also became quite enamored with Velázquez's paintings, but I didn't include any examples of Manet in here. Although if you want, you can, it's so handy to be at my desk, but you can take a look at this exhibition catalog, which is called Manet Velázquez. It's from the Met from, I think, 2008, and it grapples with those same questions. Do you think that Santiago, what do you have to say about the theology of painting?
No, I think that, I'm with you. It's fine what you said. It's okay. Perfectly, nail it.
So Santiago, this is a question, I think, for you about Las Meninas, the work you produced. So Stephanie is curious if there's any symbolism to the colors that you use throughout. She said she noticed that some pages are mostly blue and gold tones, some are reds and pinks. Was there any kind of order to how you were using color?
It's one of the points that Javier and I discussed to make the book intelligible. It's every color signals a different timeline. So, as I said before, we have the investigation of the officer of the Order of Santiago, which will be the present time in the book, and that will be always in blue. And then we have the story of Velázquez, the scenes of of his life. That will be always like the yellowish color. And then we will have all the other things that happen in different times, and that will be like full color. So that's a very visual way to separate each one of the lines and not get all confused. And Rebecca is showing now the thumbnails of the whole book. And when we do that, we put the color in, and that's a very visual way for us of having like this complete view of how all those parts are working one with the other. And you can see like a map right here on all these thumbnails, how everything is going to play out in as a whole.
Thank you. Okay, there's two people who seem interested in optics. So Linda wonders if there are books, or she mentions there's books and papers that analyze the optical accuracy of the painting Las Meninas. And she's wondering if anyone has used optics to determine if the canvas Velázquez paints is the size and shape of the actual painting.
So if you wanted to read every scholar that's written something based on optics in Las Meninas, you'd need a whole semester, I'm sure. There's even been engineers I've seen who have like reconstructed the room. And I think that all of those studies sort of miss the point by trying to make it as if Velázquez was working to make it exactly perfect, and that if we can just figure out the positioning of everything in the room, we'll finally understand the painting. I think he would enjoy the fact that we spend our time doing things like this. But if you want to read about that sort of thing, I'm sure you have access to my email and I can send you a PDF or two. It is interesting to see the room reconstructed, but I think there's no telling whether or not the canvas that we see in the painting is supposed to be Las Meninas. I think we're not supposed to know. Do you have something to add on that, Santiago?
No, I mean, it's funny because yes, I checked some books by, as you said, engineers that went absolutely crazy with all kind of measures and, graphics and geometries about the space in the painting, the space in the real palace and everything. And it's fascinating, but it's a rabbit hole I don't going to go through.
Yes.
So I think kind of a final a question. It's for you, Santiago. There's been a few comments about, wondering if you're going to make a book about Picasso or another artist. So perhaps I'll just broaden that and ask if there's anything on the horizon that you're working on.
We're working on things, but we want to do a book with all those stories that I talked about before, and a couple more. But somehow we will never get to do that because we always have something else to do before. And for us, will be easy to do now. When we finish Las Meninas, thankfully it was successful, especially in Spain. Everybody was saying, now you're going to do Picasso, you're going to do Goya, you're going to do Dalí. What are you going to do now? Well, we could be doing a series of books about this artist, but right now it's not what we're interested. We're doing different things. We just released in 2020, which was not maybe the best moment in time to release a new book, but we released a book which was based in Homer's Iliad, and that has not, it hasn't been yet translated into English, but that's the last thing we've done so far.
Great. Well, we are at time, so I want to first thank everyone for joining us today, and then give a tremendously large thank you to both Rebecca Teresi and to Santiago Garcia for joining us. This has been a really wonderful way to, I think, spend our lunch hour. As a reminder, I am recording this session, so it will be posted on the Meadows Museum YouTube page. And the last thing I want to let all of you know, since you seem to have an interest in comics and graphic novels, I want to let you know that the Cultural Office of the Embassy of Spain currently has an initiative called Illustrating Spain in the US. And they're putting out some comics, I think, on a monthly basis. So I'm going to put the link into the chat box and encourage you all to take a look at that. So thank you all for joining us. And we really hope to see you again at future programs at the Meadows Museum. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.